David never thought his life would be anything special. At 34, he worked nights as a security guard at the city's old planetarium, a job that paid just enough to cover his small apartment rent and weekly groceries. Most people would find walking empty halls for 8 hours boring, but David actually liked the quiet. The planetarium, after closing, felt peaceful, with only the soft hum of machines and the glow of emergency lights keeping him company. Every night was the same routine. He would unlock the front doors at 10 p.m., check all the rooms, make sure the expensive equipment was secure, and then settle into his rounds. The building had 3 floors, and David knew every corner by heart. The main theater where people watched star shows during the day, the gift shop with its tiny plastic rockets and glow-in-the-dark planets, and the observation deck that visitors used to look through real telescopes. David had always been fascinated by space, even as a kid. He remembered lying on his back in the grass, staring up at the night sky and wondering what was out there. In high school, he dreamed of becoming an astronomer, maybe working for NASA or discovering new planets. But dreams and reality don't always match. He tried studying astronomy in college twice, but the math was too hard and the science felt overwhelming. After failing his courses, he gave up on those big dreams and found work wherever he could. His family thought he was wasting his potential. His older brother was a successful lawyer, his sister worked as a doctor, and here was David, walking around an empty building all night. They stopped inviting him to family gatherings after a while, tired of his quiet responses and lack of career progress. David didn't blame them. He had gotten used to being invisible. The person others forgot was in the room. The only person who still believed in him was Mrs. Yang, his elderly neighbor. She lived in the apartment next to his and would often bring him homemade soup or tea. Sometimes she would sit on her small balcony in the evenings and ask David about his work. She was the only one who listened when he talked about the stars he could see from the planetarium's roof, or the interesting facts he had learned from reading astronomy books during his breaks. One Tuesday night in October, David was doing his usual rounds when he noticed something different. There was going to be a meteor shower that evening, and he was excited to watch it from the observation deck. The planetarium often stayed open late for special events like this, but tonight they had closed early due to a broken projector in the main theater. David climbed the stairs to the observation deck, carrying his thermos of coffee and a folding chair. The autumn air was crisp, and the sky was clearer than it had been in weeks. He set up his chair and tilted his head back, waiting for the show to begin. This was his favorite part of the job. These quiet moments when he felt connected to something bigger than his small life. The first meteors started appearing around midnight, bright streaks of light racing across the darkness. David had seen meteor showers before, but this one felt special. The meteors seemed brighter, more frequent, almost like the universe was putting on a personal show just for him. He pulled out his phone to take a few pictures, though he knew they wouldn't capture the real beauty of what he was seeing. That's when he heard the sound. It was faint at first, like someone moaning or crying. David thought maybe it was a cat or some other animal, but as he listened more carefully, it sounded human. He stood up from his chair and walked to the edge of the observation deck, looking down at the parking lot and entrance area below. There, lying on the grass near the front entrance, was a young woman. She appeared to be unconscious. Her long dark hair spread around her head like a fan. David's heart started beating faster. In all his years working at the planetarium, nothing like this had ever happened. He had dealt with occasional equipment, problems, and once had to call the police about someone trying to break in, but never anything involving an injured person. David rushed downstairs, grabbing the first aid kit from behind the security desk. When he reached the woman, he could see she was breathing but unconscious. She looked to be in her mid-20s, wearing unusual clothes that seemed to shimmer slightly in the moonlight. Next to her was a worn leather journal, its pages flipping gently in the night breeze. He checked for obvious injuries but didn't see any blood or signs of trauma. David had taken a basic first aid course when he started the security job, so he knew not to move her too much in case she had hurt her neck or back. Instead, he called for an ambulance and waited beside her, occasionally checking to make sure she was still breathing normally. While waiting for help to arrive, David couldn't help but notice the journal beside her. Some of the pages had fallen open, revealing hand-drawn star charts and diagrams he had never seen before. The drawings were incredibly detailed, showing constellations and planetary positions with mathematical precision. Whoever this woman was, she clearly knew a lot about astronomy. The paramedics arrived within 15 minutes and carefully loaded the woman onto a stretcher. She had started to wake up slightly, mumbling words David couldn't understand. As they prepared to take her to the hospital, one of the paramedics asked David if he knew her or had seen what happened. David explained that he was just the night security guard and had found her while watching the meteor shower. The paramedic handed him a business card and asked him to call if he remembered anything else. As the ambulance drove away, David stood alone in the parking lot, holding the woman's journal. He knew he should have given it to the paramedics, but something made him hesitate. Back inside the planetarium, David sat at his security desk and carefully opened the journal. The pages were filled with star charts, notes in different languages, and what looked like predictions about astronomical events. Some of the writing was in English, mentioning dates, locations, and celestial phenomena with incredible accuracy. David recognized some of the events described, meteor showers and planetary alignments that had happened over the past few months. The most interesting part was a section near the back of the journal that seemed to be about finding someone. The writing was a bit faded, but David could make out phrases like "born under the hunter's stars" and "keeper of ancient knowledge." There were detailed descriptions of astronomical events that would signal the appearance of this mysterious person, many of which matched things David had witnessed during his time at the planetarium. As David read through the journal, he felt a strange connection to the information. Many of the star charts showed constellations in positions he had observed and remembered, even though he had never formally studied advanced astronomy. The mathematical calculations, which should have been beyond his understanding, somehow made sense to him in a way he couldn't explain. The rest of his shift passed quickly as David found himself absorbed in the journal's contents. When morning came and his replacement arrived, David realized he had spent the entire night reading instead of doing his security rounds. Fortunately, nothing had happened that required his attention, and the building was secure. Driving home. In the early morning light, David couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious woman and her journal. For the first time in years, he felt curious about something, excited even. His boring, predictable life had suddenly become interesting, and he had no idea what would happen next. All he knew was that finding this woman had somehow changed something inside him, awakening a part of himself that had been sleeping for far too long. David couldn't sleep when he got home that morning. He kept the mysterious journal on his kitchen table, occasionally flipping through its pages while drinking coffee. The handwritten notes and star charts seemed to pull him in, like they were trying to tell him something important. He had never felt this curious about anything in years. Around noon, his phone rang. The caller ID showed the local hospital number. David's heart started racing as he answered. "Hello, is this David Chen?" a nurse asked. "You found a young woman last night at the planetarium?" "Yes, that's me. Is she okay?" "She's awake and asking for you. She says you have something that belongs to her. Would you be able to come by this afternoon?" David looked at the journal on his table. Of course she would want it back. "I'll be there in an hour," he said. The hospital was busy with afternoon visitors when David arrived. He found the woman in room 314, sitting up in bed and looking much better than she had the night before. Her dark hair was pulled back, and her eyes were bright and alert. When she saw David walk in, she smiled like she was seeing an old friend. "You must be David," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Luna. Thank you for helping me last night." David shook her hand and pulled the journal from his backpack. I think this belongs to you. I'm sorry I didn't give it to the paramedics, but I wanted to make sure you got it back safely. Luna took the journal and held it close to her chest. This journal is everything to me. It belonged to my grandmother, and it's the reason I was at your planetarium last night. Your grandmother was an astronomer? David asked, pulling up a chair beside her bed. She was many things, Luna said with a sad smile. Astronomer, mathematician, storyteller. She raised me after my parents died when I was 12. She taught me everything about reading the stars and understanding celestial patterns. Luna opened the journal to a page near the middle. My grandmother spent her whole life researching something she called the Starborn King prophecy. She believed that certain people are born with a natural connection to the universe, able to understand star patterns in ways that others cannot. David felt uncomfortable. That sounds like fantasy, not science. I thought so too for a long time, Luna said, but then my grandmother started making predictions that came true. She would tell me when meteor showers would appear before the astronomy websites announced them. She could predict weather changes by watching how stars twinkled. And she always said that one day I would find the person she had been looking for. Luna turned to a page filled with detailed notes. Look at this. My grandmother wrote down specific signs that would help me recognize this person. Born during a specific constellation alignment, works in a place connected to astronomy, has an unusual ability to remember star positions without formal training. David leaned forward to look at the page. The writing was neat and precise, listing characteristics that made him feel strangely uneasy. What does any of this have to do with me? Tell me about your birthmark, Luna said quietly. David instinctively touched his left shoulder, where he had a cluster of small, dark spots that had been there since birth. How did you know about that? Can I see it? David hesitated, then rolled up his sleeve. The birthmark was clearly visible, 7 small, dark spots arranged in a familiar pattern. Luna's eyes widened. It's exactly like the constellation Orion. My grandmother drew this exact pattern in her journal 20 years ago. That's just a coincidence, David said, though his voice didn't sound convincing even to himself. Luna flipped to another page. She also wrote that this person would be working at a place where people come to learn about stars during the October meteor shower of 2023. She said he would find me during the peak night of the shower, when I would be unconscious and carrying this journal. David felt a chill run down his spine. Everything Luna was saying matched exactly what had happened the night before. But it couldn't be real. People didn't predict the future, especially not something as specific as this. I know how this sounds, Luna continued. I've been traveling for 3 months following my grandmother's notes, checking every planetarium and observatory mentioned in her research. Yours was the last one on the list. I honestly didn't think I would find anything. What happened to you last night? David asked. Why were you unconscious? Luna looked embarrassed. I had been watching the meteor shower from the parking lot, taking notes and comparing them to my grandmother's predictions. I must have gotten too excited and stood up too quickly. I've always had low blood pressure and sometimes I faint. When I woke up in the ambulance, the first thing I asked about was my journal. David studied Luna's face, trying to decide if she was telling the truth or if this was some elaborate trick. She seemed sincere, but the whole story was too strange to believe. Let me show you something else, Luna said, turning to a different section of the journal. My grandmother documented unusual weather patterns that occur around people with this star connection. Clear skies during important astronomical events, even when weather reports predict clouds. She pulled out her phone and showed David a weather app. Look at tonight's forecast. Cloudy skies, possible rain. But I bet if you check the sky around your planetarium tonight, it will be perfectly clear. That's impossible to predict, David said. Is it? Think about your time working at the planetarium. Have you ever noticed that the sky seems to clear up when you're doing something related to astronomy? Maybe when you're giving tours or watching meteor showers? David thought back over the past few years. Now that Luna mentioned it, he did remember several times when the weather forecast had been wrong during his night shifts. Cloudy evenings that became crystal clear, rainy nights that stopped just in time for him to see interesting celestial events from the observation deck. "This is all just coincidence," David said, but he was starting to sound less sure of himself. Luna closed the journal and looked directly at him. "David, I've spent my whole adult life trying to understand my grandmother's research. I've studied astronomy, mathematics, and meteorology. I'm not some crazy person making things up. My grandmother was brilliant, and she was rarely wrong about anything." "So what are you saying? That I'm some kind of chosen one from a prophecy? I'm saying that maybe you're more special than you think. My grandmother believed that people like you exist to help others connect with the wonder of the universe. Not to rule over anyone, but to inspire them to look up at the stars and feel less alone." David sat quietly for a moment, processing everything Luna had told him. Part of him wanted to dismiss it all as nonsense, but another part of him felt curious. For the first time in years, someone was telling him that he might be important, that his life might have meaning beyond just walking empty hallways at night. "What would you want me to do?" he asked finally. Luna smiled. "Let me show you what my grandmother discovered. Give me a chance to prove that you're not just an ordinary security guard. If I'm wrong, you can go back to your regular life and forget we ever met." David looked at Luna's hopeful face and made a decision that would change everything. "Okay," he said. "Show me." Luna was discharged from the hospital the next day, and David found himself doing something he never thought he would do. He offered to let her stay in his spare room while she recovered and conducted her research. His small apartment wasn't much, but it had a pull-out couch and was close to the planetarium where she wanted to spend her time. "Are you sure about this?" Luna asked as David helped her carry her single suitcase up the stairs. "I don't want to be a burden." "It's fine," David said, though he wasn't entirely sure why he was being so helpful to someone he had just met. "Besides, Mrs. Yang will be excited to have another person to cook for." As if on cue, Mrs. Yang's door opened and she peeked out into the hallway. "David, who is your friend?" David introduced Luna, explaining that she was a researcher studying astronomy and would be staying for a few weeks. Mrs. Yang immediately invited them both for dinner, insisting that Luna looked too thin and needed proper food to recover from her hospital stay. Over the next few days, Luna began accompanying David to work. The planetarium director, Dr. Peterson, didn't mind having an additional person around, especially since Luna clearly knew a lot about astronomy and could help with some of the educational programs during the day. During David's night shifts, Luna would sit with him in the security office, reading from her grandmother's journal and teaching him things about star navigation that weren't in any textbook he had ever seen. She showed him how to predict weather changes by watching the way stars appeared to twinkle, and how to estimate the time without looking at a clock by observing the position of certain constellations. "Your grandmother really knew all this?" David asked one night as Luna demonstrated how to calculate the distance to various stars using only visual observation. "She learned it from her grandmother, and she learned it from hers," Luna explained. "This knowledge has been passed down through my family for generations, but my grandmother was the first to write it all down and try to understand the science behind it." David was amazed to discover that many of the techniques Luna taught him felt natural, like he was remembering something he had once known but forgotten. He could predict when the planetarium's old air conditioning system would break down by watching how the stars appeared through the observation deck windows. He began to notice that equipment problems always seemed to happen on nights when certain constellations were in specific positions. "This is impossible," David said after successfully predicting the exact minute when a power fluctuation would cause the main computer to restart. "There's no scientific explanation for any of this." Luna smiled as she made notes in her journal. "My grandmother always said that science hasn't discovered everything yet, Just because we can't explain something doesn't mean it isn't real. After 2 weeks of working together, David began to feel more confident about his abilities. Luna encouraged him to start giving informal tours to the few visitors who came to the planetarium during evening hours. He discovered that he could explain complex astronomical concepts in ways that made people excited about learning more. "You have a gift," Luna told him after watching him help a group of middle school students understand how black holes work. "You make astronomy feel magical instead of intimidating." But David's growing confidence was mixed with doubt. Late at night, when Luna was asleep on his couch, he would lie awake wondering if he was just imagining these abilities. Maybe Luna was so convinced about her grandmother's prophecy that she was seeing patterns where none existed. Maybe he was just getting better at his job because someone was finally paying attention to him. The doubt became stronger when David decided to research Luna's background online. He found several articles about her grandmother, Dr. Catherine Blackwood, who had been a respected astronomer at a major university before she retired. But he also found forum posts and blog comments from people who called her a pseudo-scientist and claimed her later research was based on superstition rather than facts. David also discovered that Luna's parents had died in a car accident when she was 12, just as she had told him. After that, she had been raised by her grandmother and had never really had a normal childhood. David began to wonder if Luna's quest to find the Starborn king was her way of dealing with grief and loneliness rather than a genuine scientific investigation. These doubts came to a head during their 3rd week together. David was giving a tour to a small group of astronomy enthusiasts when one of them asked a complicated question about planetary orbits. Without thinking, David gave a detailed answer that impressed everyone, including himself. But afterward, he felt like a fraud. "I looked up information about your grandmother," David told Luna that night. "Some people think her later work wasn't real science." Luna's face fell. "I know what people say about her. After my parents died, she became obsessed with finding patterns in everything. Some of her colleagues thought she was losing her mind." "Were they right?" David asked gently. Luna was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she admitted. "I was just a kid when she started working on the Starborn King research. I wanted to believe everything she told me because she was all I had left. Maybe I've been chasing something that only existed in her imagination." David felt terrible for making Luna doubt herself, but he also felt relieved to hear her acknowledge his concerns. "What if we're both just seeing what we want to see?" he asked. "Maybe we are," Luna said sadly. "Maybe I've been so desperate to prove my grandmother wasn't crazy that I convinced myself you were special when you're just a normal person who's good at his job." The next few days were awkward. Luna still came to work with David, but the excitement was gone. David went back to his regular routine of checking doors and making sure the building was secure. He stopped trying to predict equipment problems or giving impromptu tours to visitors. But then something happened that neither of them could ignore. On a Thursday night in November, the planetarium was hosting a special event for local amateur astronomers. Dr. Peterson had asked David to work overtime to help with security and setup. Luna was there too, helping to organize telescopes on the observation deck. During the event, the main projector in the theater suddenly stopped working. Dr. Peterson was frustrated because the breakdown happened right in the middle of an important presentation to potential donors. The repair technician couldn't come until the next morning, and the donors were getting ready to leave. "David," Dr. Peterson said, "you know this building better than anyone. Is there any way to get the projector working again?" David looked at Luna, who nodded encouragingly. "I can try," he said. What happened next surprised everyone, including David himself. Without really thinking about it, he began explaining the current night sky to the donors, using only his knowledge of star positions and a laser pointer. He talked about the constellations visible from their location, the history behind their names, and the scientific discoveries that had been made by studying them. As David spoke, something magical happened. The donors forgot about the broken projector and became completely absorbed in his presentation. He answered their questions with confidence and made connections between different astronomical concepts that impressed even Dr. Peterson. When the event was over, 3 of the donors approached Dr. Peterson about funding a new educational program at the planetarium, specifically requesting that David be involved in developing the curriculum. Luna waited until they were alone before speaking. "You did that without any notes, without any preparation. You just knew what to say." David sat down heavily in his security chair. "I don't understand what's happening to me." "Maybe it doesn't matter if we understand it," Luna said softly. "Maybe what matters is that you're helping people fall in love with astronomy the same way your grandmother's stories helped me fall in love with the stars." David looked at Luna and realized that whether or not her grandmother's prophecy was real, Luna's belief in him had changed his life. For the first time in years, he felt like he had found his purpose. The success of David's impromptu presentation changed everything. Dr. Peterson called him into the office the next morning with news that would have seemed impossible just a month ago. "David, I've been thinking about what happened last night," Dr. Peterson said, leaning back in his chair. "You showed more natural teaching ability in 30 minutes than some of our trained educators display in months. I want to offer you a promotion." David stared at his boss in disbelief. "A promotion? I'm just a security guard." "Not anymore. I'm creating a new position for you as our community outreach coordinator. You develop educational programs, give presentations to schools and community groups, and help us connect with people who might never otherwise visit a planetarium. The salary increase would double David's income. More importantly, it would give him a chance to do work that actually mattered to him." But accepting the job felt scary. What if he failed? What if the previous night had just been a lucky accident? "Can I think about it?" David asked. "Of course. Take your time." That evening, David found Luna sitting on his apartment balcony, reading her grandmother's journal under the porch light. She looked up when he sat down beside her. "Dr. Peterson offered me a real job today," David said, "teaching people about astronomy." Luna's face lit up. "David, that's wonderful. You're going to accept it, right?" "I don't know. What if I'm not actually good at this? What if last night was just beginner's luck?" Luna closed the journal and turned to face him. "Do you remember what you told that little girl during the presentation, when she asked why stars twinkle?" David nodded. He had explained that stars appear to twinkle because their light has to travel through Earth's atmosphere, which moves and shifts like water. But he had described it as stars dancing in the sky, which made the girl giggle and ask more questions. "You didn't just give her facts," Luna continued. "You made her excited about learning. That's not luck, David. That's a gift." Over the next week, David found himself paying more attention to how he interacted with the planetarium's visitors. During his security rounds, he started stopping to chat with people who stayed late to look through the telescopes. He discovered that he enjoyed answering their questions and sharing interesting facts about what they were seeing. One evening, a frustrated father approached David for help. His teenage son was struggling with physics homework and had lost all interest in science. "He used to love looking at the stars when he was little," the father explained. "But now he says science is boring and too hard to understand." David found the teenager sitting alone in the lobby, staring at his phone while his father talked to the staff about telescope tours. "Hey," David said, sitting down beside him. "I heard you're having trouble with physics." The boy shrugged. "It's stupid. All these formulas and equations that don't mean anything." "What if I told you that every formula in your textbook is actually describing something amazing happening in space right now?" David asked. For the next hour, David helped the teenager understand gravity by explaining how it keeps planets in orbit around the sun. He used the motion of galaxies to demonstrate momentum and showed how the color of stars reveals their temperature and age. By the end of their conversation, the boy was asking questions and taking notes. "How do you know all this stuff?" the teenager asked. "Are you a professor or something?" "I'm just a security guard who loves looking at stars," David said. "But I've learned that the universe is way more interesting than any textbook makes it seem." When the father came to collect his son, the boy was excited to show him what he had learned. "Dad, did you know that the light from some stars is so old that we're actually seeing them as they looked before humans even existed?" the father thanked David with tears in his eyes. "I haven't seen him this excited about anything in months." That night, David made his decision. He called Dr. Peterson and accepted the promotion. Luna was thrilled when David told her the news. "My grandmother always said that the Starborn King's real power wasn't magic," she said. "It was the ability to help others see wonder in the world around them." "I still don't know if I believe in prophecies," David admitted. "But I'm starting to believe in myself." Luna pulled out her grandmother's journal and turned to the final pages. "There's something I haven't shown you yet. My grandmother wrote about what would happen after the Starborn King accepted his role." The page contained detailed drawings of star charts and celestial events, along with notes about expanding the kingdom of wonder and teaching others to teach. She predicted that once the Starborn King found his confidence, he would inspire others to become teachers and storytellers themselves. She called it creating a constellation of educators, each one helping more people fall in love with the night sky. David looked at the drawings and recognized several astronomical events that were scheduled to happen over the next few months. "Your grandmother really thought about everything, didn't she? She spent 40 years researching this. I think she knew that finding you was just the beginning." 2 weeks into his new job, David was asked to give a presentation to the city's science teachers. The topic was making astronomy accessible to students. David was nervous about speaking to a room full of professional educators, but Luna helped him prepare by sharing more techniques from her grandmother's journal. The presentation went better than David had dared to hope. He showed the teachers how to use storytelling to make scientific concepts memorable, how to connect astronomy to students' everyday experiences, and how to encourage questions rather than just memorizing facts. After his talk, several teachers approached him with ideas for collaboration. A high school physics teacher wanted to bring her classes to the planetarium for hands-on learning experiences. An elementary school principal asked if David would be willing to visit their school for a science night event. Most surprisingly, Dr. Rebecca Santos from the State University's Education Department asked to speak with him privately. "I've been looking for someone like you for years," she said. "We're developing a new program to train community science educators, and I think you'd be perfect as one of our instructors." David couldn't believe what he was hearing. "I don't have any formal teaching credentials." "You have something better," Dr. Santos replied. "You have the ability to make people care about learning. That's much harder to teach than classroom management or lesson planning." That evening, David sat on his balcony with Luna, looking up at the clear night sky. The city lights made it difficult to see many stars, but they could still make out the major constellations. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if I hadn't found you that night?" Luna asked. David considered the question. A month ago, he had been a lonely security guard with no prospects and no confidence. Now he was planning educational programs, inspiring students, and being offered opportunities he never could have imagined. "I think I would have stayed invisible forever," he said honestly. "You didn't just find me, Luna. You helped me find myself." Luna smiled and opened her grandmother's journal to a page near the very end. "My grandmother wrote something here that I think you're ready to hear now," she read aloud. "The Starborn King will know he has truly accepted his crown when he stops asking whether he deserves it. His kingdom is not built on worthiness, but on willingness to help others see their own light among the stars." David felt something settle inside him, a quiet confidence he had never experienced before. He was ready to embrace whatever came next. 6 months later, David barely recognized his own life. He was standing in front of 200 elementary school students in the packed auditorium of Lincoln Elementary, preparing to give his 20th school presentation of the semester. Luna sat in the back row, taking notes and photographs for the educational program they were developing together. "Who here has ever wished on a shooting star?" David asked the audience. Dozens of small hands shot up into the air, accompanied by excited chatter. "Well, I have some good news for you," David continued with a smile. "Tonight is going to be the perfect night to see shooting stars, and I'm going to teach you the secret to making sure your wishes come true." The children leaned forward in their seats, completely captivated. David had learned that the key to reaching young audiences was to start with something they already cared about, then gradually introduce the science behind it. "The secret is this," David said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "You have to understand what shooting stars really are. They're not actually stars at all. They're tiny pieces of space rocks burning up in our atmosphere, putting on a light show just for us." Over the next 45 minutes, David took the students on a journey through the solar system, explaining how meteor showers form, why planets orbit the sun, and how astronomers discover new worlds around distant stars. He used simple props and storytelling techniques that made complex concepts easy to understand. When question time came, the students' hands shot up faster than David could call on them. A second grader wanted to know if aliens lived on other planets. A fourth grader asked why the moon changed shape. A kindergartner wondered if stars ever got tired of shining. David answered each question with patience and enthusiasm, often turning the students' curiosity into mini-lessons that taught additional concepts. By the end of the presentation, several children were already making plans to ask their parents to take them to see the meteor shower that evening. After the students filed out of the auditorium, their teacher approached David with a huge smile. "That was incredible," she said. "I've never seen my kids so engaged with science content. Half of them want to be astronomers now." "That's the whole point," David replied. "If we can get them excited about learning when they're young, they'll keep that curiosity for the rest of their lives." Luna joined them, showing David the notes she had taken during his presentation. "You improvised at least 6 new explanations today that weren't in our original script. Your ability to adapt to your audience keeps getting better." David looked at Luna's notes, which documented not just what he had said, but how the students had responded. Over the past few months, she had become an invaluable partner in developing their educational programs. Her background in research, combined with David's natural teaching ability, had created something neither of them could have achieved alone. "Dr. Santos called while you were presenting," Luna continued. "She wants to schedule our meeting with the National Science Foundation next week. They're very interested in funding our community education initiative." David still felt amazed when he thought about how far they had come. What had started as David accepting a promotion at the planetarium had grown into something much larger. Word about his teaching methods had spread throughout the education community, leading to invitations to speak at conferences and collaborate with researchers. The Community Education Initiative was their most ambitious project yet. They wanted to create a network of local astronomy educators who could bring hands-on science learning to underserved communities. The program would train teachers, parents, and community volunteers to lead stargazing events and basic astronomy workshops. "Are you nervous about the NSF meeting?" Luna asked as they packed up their presentation materials. "A little," David admitted. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life now." That evening, David and Luna drove to a dark field outside the city to watch the meteor shower he had promised the students. They brought folding chairs, hot chocolate in thermoses, and Luna's grandmother's journal. As they waited for the meteors to begin, David reflected on how much had changed since that night 6 months ago when he had found Luna unconscious outside the planetarium. Back then, he had been a lonely security guard who thought his life would never amount to anything special. Now he was planning educational programs that could potentially reach thousands of students across multiple states. "Do you think your grandmother knew all this would happen?" David asked, gesturing at the presentation materials they had brought to review under the starlight. Luna opened the journal to a section near the end that she had only recently discovered. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a detailed drawing of what appeared to be a family tree or organizational chart. "My grandmother drew this diagram showing how the Starborn King's influence would spread. She predicted that he would start by teaching individuals, then groups, then eventually train others to become teachers themselves." David studied the drawing, which showed connections branching out from a central figure to dozens of smaller figures, each connected to even more people. "It looks like she was describing exactly what we're trying to do with the community education program." "She also wrote something here that I think you need to hear," Luna said, turning to a page filled with her grandmother's neat handwriting. She read aloud, "The Starborn King's greatest achievement will not be the number of people he teaches directly, but the number of teachers he inspires to carry on his work. His true kingdom is built not of subjects, but of fellow educators who share his mission to help others find wonder in the universe." As if summoned by their conversation, the first meteors began streaking across the sky. David and Luna leaned, back in their chairs, watching the celestial light show in comfortable silence. "You know what I realized today?" David said after a particularly bright meteor left a glowing trail across the darkness. "I used to think being called a king meant I was supposed to be above other people, commanding them or ruling over them." "And now?" Luna asked. "Now I understand that being a king means serving others. My crown isn't made of gold or jewels. It's made of all the moments when I've helped someone see something beautiful they never noticed before." Luna smiled and pulled out her phone to check the time. "The meteor shower should peak in about an hour. Perfect timing for the students who are watching tonight." David imagined dozens of families spread across the city, children lying on blankets, in their backyards, searching the sky for shooting stars and remembering what they had learned in his presentation earlier that day. Some of those children might grow up to become scientists, teachers, or space explorers themselves. "I have something for you," Luna said, reaching into her backpack. She pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook that looked similar to her grandmother's journal, but was brand new. "What's this?" David asked, accepting the notebook. "Your own journal. My grandmother always said that knowledge should be written down and shared with future generations. I think it's time for you to start documenting your own discoveries about teaching and learning." David opened the notebook to the first page where Luna had written an inscription. "For David, the Starborn King, whose kingdom grows brighter with every person he inspires to look up at the stars." As the meteor shower reached its peak, filling the sky with streaks of light, David began writing his first entry. He wrote about the children he had met that day, their questions and their wonder, and his hopes for the educational programs they were developing. He was no longer just a human being who happened to work at a planetarium. He had become someone who helped others discover their own connections to the universe. Luna had been right all along. He was the Starborn King, not because of any prophecy or magical powers, but because he had learned to help others see the extraordinary in what they had always assumed was ordinary. The kingdom of wonder that he and Luna were building together would continue to grow, one student, one teacher, one stargazer at a time. And that felt more magical than any prophecy ever could.